Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Imperfects, Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. So, for those of you that are kind of looking for a supernatural kind of show, this will probably fit that bill for you. Because, of course, I wanted to go on and compare this show to, like, Being Human or Misfits, or I even wanted to compare this show a little bit to X-Men. Because we end up getting this kind of like one doctor character who is to mentor this group of three, and then we end up going on and getting random characters that may or may not help out this group of three, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so we, for the most point, let's focus right away on just explaining these characters. So, in the middle here, we have Tilda. Come to find out, she has super hearing, but also is to have this black canary kind of scream of sorts. They end up calling her like a banshee. And so it seems that this girl can scream and just mostly break glass for these 2 whole episodes. That's all we see her do. Tilda, of course, is to be this lead singer of this band, and kind of that's where, like, this story for her, like kind of really rests on. But then all of a sudden we realize, okay, like, Tilda can't be a lead singer for a band anymore, and then, like, her story just has to get infused with these other 2 people. So, let's go on and let's talk about Abby. Abby is to be this doctor slash scientist, really smart girl that is to, I guess, be going on and having Oxford calling her for an interview and so on and so forth because she's so smart. But come to find out, Abby is to have the power of attraction. It seems that this woman is to be secreting these pheromones that are to make everybody want to chase after her, want her desperately, and Abby is to be in fear of being around others because she is to realize that at some point she's going to go on and have to literally beat people off with a stick because of her pheromones backfiring and needing to have people just swarm her and grab her and want her. Wow, what a horrible life that she has to lead. So then we go on to Juan. Juan, of course, is to be a comic book artist, and I'm immediately just like, you know what you're doing, show. You have a superhero show where you have a comic book artist. Like, yeah, like, that's clever, show. That's clever. That's so clever. Because immediately I'm like, okay, I like this, but, we'll get there. So, Juan, we find out, is to at some point be desperately trying to get Marvel or DC or some kind of comic book company somewhere to pick up his Sugar Skull PI book, where this guy is to be this detective wrestler guy and so on and so forth. And we have a few images of what this Sugar Skull character looks like. It's kind of interesting, but then again, like, it feels like there's just a lot there. So, when Juan is to go to a party at his place that is thrown by his girlfriend, all of a sudden we have Juan who is to wake up one day, and he is to all of a sudden have his shirt that is very ripped up, and he is to have blood upon his mouth. Juan is like, wow, that party must have been really crazy. That must have been a really wild party. And then all of a sudden we find out that Juan is to be much more wild than we think, because this character, of course, is to be a chupacabra / werewolf like character. And so I'm like, oh, okay, all right, like this is cool. But not only that, the characters that they additionally add in who have powers, I was like, all right, like there's some cool showcasing here, even though some of it feels either like being human or misfits, because they in the show Misfits had the exact same kind of powers as these characters do for the most point. So because if in like Misfits we have a character who can like hear people's thoughts, so hearing people's thoughts and having someone go on to like listen to somebody from 100 miles away, same thing. It's the exact same thing. So anyways, so once we get past the showcasing of the characters, there honestly isn't much of a story beyond that. All that the story isn't to entail, which quickly in 2 episodes they realize that there is no story, and they just have to keep adding characters to eat up time. The whole story of it is that they're chasing after Dr. Sarkov. And that's really it. Hey guys, like, yeah, let's go on and try to find this guy. Yeah, we need to find him because he needs to give us medication. That, of course, is to no longer exist. And so, like, these characters are chasing after these meds that don't exist to realize they go on and meet this Dr. Sydney Burke. And Dr. Sydney Burke is to have her own power, which was like, ooh, like, this character is interesting from what very little that I've seen so far. It kind of feels like Dr. Burke might be, like, a villain. But then again, like, there's a lot of just unsureness about, like, what's really going on with the show. But because even in Misfits, we had certain characters that were to think that they were like, oh my god, am I going to be the villain of this story? Like, is my power going to be uncontrolled? Like, da 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 da. And then come to find out, it's like, oh no, like this character is to not be the villain of this story. Like, he ends up getting like re-put into the group, and it seems that he is to be the one guy who is to help the group out more than we thought. So yeah, so maybe Dr. Burke may be that once she like controls her power. That is to kind of be like somewhat like Freddy Krueger like, it seems, because Dr. Burke doesn't really know if she's awake or asleep, and she of course is to have this kind of counterpart like character that by the end of episode 2 looks really cool, and so on and so forth. And so we come to find out also showcase this character called Doug, who looks like that he's not going to be much into this show, but like he of course has this kind of Wolverine Deadpool kind of power to him, or Lobo, with the exclusion of like Deadpool or Lobo like will heal like regardless, where this character, if you go on and you kind of chop off his head, like that kind of does him in. So yeah, like we have this character who's only focused on his own death because he's always in pain. So yeah, so beyond the showcasing of characters, there obviously isn't much story beyond this. So let's go on and let's go into the double 5 time territory. Let's get into spoilers. So with that said, the show. If already like within 2 episodes in, like they don't have a story for this show, I'm kind of concerned. Like I can just keep hanging on because I'm like, okay, they're giving me some interesting characters, but is that going to be it? Is there going to be like not really a thought being put into this show, which already like it kind of feels like they're hanging on like these like Tilda, who's kind of bringing in the jokes, or they're kind of really relying on like them to like come together as a group and then separate to have them go back to their lives. Um, and that's kind of what they do for this show within these 2 episodes. I'm like, well, there has to be more of a story than just that. There has to be something. But anyways, um, let's go on and let's go into spoil time. Spoil time. It's about that time you spoil these episodes. So in the very beginning of this show, we of course have Tilda. Uh, Tilda, of course, is to be this rock star, and she is singing in this band, and she all of a sudden is to have uh, after her kind of performance, she of course is calling for this band to go on tour, and immediately Tilda is bargaining that they want to get this exported beer instead of these goofy slushies. So Tilda's going on and mentioning that music is her life. She has gone on through the years and relied on a certain set of music to get her through certain hard times. And so that's what she uses as a bargaining chip to try to get certain specific beer in her green room for when they go on tour. So we, of course, have PJ, who is her lover, and the funny thing about PJ, I just went on and just saw him in a horror movie called Margos. And I was like, oh my god, like, what a small world. Like the same actor just being in another show I just coincidentally watched. And I was like, because I even double checked to make sure it was the same actor. I was like, surefire enough. Like, what a small world. Like, this guy's getting a lot of gigs, I guess, lately. So we go on to have PJ, who is talking to Tilda, and he's asking Tilda, it's like, well, hey, like, have you been behind on your bills? And Tilda's like, well, if anything, like, the bills are getting behind on me. So PJ is telling Tilda, it's like, well, hey, like, you're unusually cold. It's like you're, like, a dead corpse kind of cold. And Tilda is just like, well, like, then that's why I have you here to warm me up. And as they go on and they kiss. So we go on to, of course, showcase Abby. So Abby, of course, is talking to her friends who are, of course, I think both Paul and Jules. And so Abby is going and talking about her possibly getting into Oxford, and Jules is telling her, it's like, well, why not get into like Flux? That's actually a better school than Oxford. It's like, okay, whatever goofy things that you guys got going on. So Abby is going on and thinking like, well, hey, if I get accepted into Oxford, like I'm gonna need to go on and like and I'm gonna have to just like disconnect my internet and disconnect this and disconnect everything. And we also had Abby that was working on her speech to give how her parents, her father was to be this champion of some sport, and that her mother was to go on and be like uh, this cook who is known for this certain meal, and Abby could not go on and do either one of those things. Instead, she was to be this doctor, scientist, whatever girl. So she is rattling off this speech, and like they're saying, it's like, well, no, don't say any of that. Like, if anything, you might as well just tell him that you have like some illness. And Abby's like, well, that's going to be on the second paragraph. It's like, oh, okay. So, because come to find out, uh, they end up having like abbreviation for what all these characters have. It's like AGHD or something, or some goofy thing like that, where they have to go on and like have a whole like title for it. So it's like a disorder and whatever. So Abby goes on and she's thinking about all the possibilities that life will bring, but then she's also thinking about her medication and how rare it is for her to be able to get this medication if she goes off to another state or another school or whatever. And only Dr. Sarkoff is to have this medication. But every time we talk to these characters, it's really focusing all about how they're starting to run out of their prescription medication and they have to go to Dr. Sarkov to get it. So we now go to Juan. And so Juan is to make his way into the Seattle Institute of Art. And it seems that Juan is to talk to this person at this school about this sugar skull PI character, going on about like he's a wrestler and he's a this and he's a detective and so on and so forth. And so Juan is to mention how he, of course, uh, was to have him and his friend try and go on and or him and his like relative or something like that try and get this comic book out somewhere, or like somehow get Juan to sell some book. And for every company that they try to go to, Marvel, DC, whichever that exists also, that they really don't really. They could have said Image, they could have said anything else. But anyways, so wanted to say it's like, well, none of those were for me, so I went on and tried to independently sell my comic book. And so come to find out, the Seattle Institute of Art is to realize that this guy had gone on and published, without their permission, like 2,000 of these comic books for Juan to try and sell it. And they're like, yeah, you you took our resources and you printed out this book without our permission. And so Juan ends up bargaining with the guy for a certain kind of back end for these books, like meaning that the Institute is going to somehow get paid for every issue that Juan at some point sells. Basically, to have this guy just like, okay, like, oh, for every $1 I make from this, you'll get like 50 cents or 10 cents or whatever. So Juan ends up starting to feel a little bit I'm not feeling all that great. So he decides to go on and try and take his medication to find out that his medication is gone. So Juan is to probably think, well, I could probably like make it a day or two without this medication. I think I might be fine. So, but we have at some point where all three of these characters are to make their way back into this clinic to try and talk to Dr. Sarkoff. And so we have Dr. Sarkoff who starts talking to Abby, and Abby's like, oh yeah, like I'm a scientist now, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and Dr. Sarkoff is like, oh, well, you got that from me. So we have Tilda that is looking at Dr. Sarkoff, and she's like, pills? Like, medication? Like, we're running out? So Dr. Sarkoff is to bring these three in and is to tell them, like, yeah, like, here's this container that has all these pills for you. Go and take them. So they end up taking these pills and they're like, okay, all right, like this is gonna be fine now. So some time has passed, and so we have Juan that ends up going to this party that his girlfriend is throwing, and so all of a sudden it seems that Juan is to drink 2 beers and become ill, and he's like, you know what, I think I'm gonna go on and just rest. And so, come to find out, Juan the very next day is to wake up in this field, and there's of course blood upon his mouth. And so he's like, okay, like, what did I do? So Juan rushes back into the house, and he is going into the bathroom, kind of washing his face, getting this robe on, so that way his girlfriend won't freak out. So Juan then is to try to make up something for his girlfriend, to like tell her like, hey, how about you read this, or how about I get this for you while I'm out? How about I get a coffee for you while I'm out? And this girl's like, don't mention liquids, I gotta go pee. So Juan at one point is to finally get out of the bathroom and is to throw away his clothes. But Juan is to try to mention like, hey, like, let me go out and let me get something. And his girlfriend's like, well, aren't you gonna like put clothes on? He's like, oh yeah, you probably should. So we have Tilda, or no wait, yeah, we have Tilda who's going on and playing another performance, and all of a sudden during her performance, she is to completely lose being able to sing properly, and all this sound just starts hitting her, and so Tilda like runs off stage, and we then go on and have one of her bandmates try to finish up the song. And so PJ is to say to Tilda, it's like, well, hey, are you getting like performance anxiety, or you're getting cold feet? And like, because all the band are just like, hey, she's going to mess this up for us again, and like, we're probably going to just ditch this girl if it seems that she's gonna go on and ruin what we're trying to do. And all of a sudden we have PJ that walks into the bar, and so Till is telling PJ, it's like, well, like, I already know that the band like wants to get rid of me, and PJ's like, what are you talking about? It's like, anybody can know what all the rest of the band is all thinking. And PJ's like, well, stop that, like, come on, like. So come to find out, the band is to go on and quickly just replace this girl without even consulting her about it, and they underhandingly like do auditions like for another girl to be the lead singer, and they're like, oh, thank god we end up just finding this girl in the nick of time, so we can just immediately place um Tilda as our singer, and we can just go on tour. And Tilda, who ends up having this like headgear on, but she can still hear everything, she overhears what these guys are saying, and she ends up doing this scream, and of course this breaks this glass. So we realize that Tilda needs to come up with a quick cure for what ails her, so that way she can go back to singing like she was. So now we, of course, go on and have Abby, who is getting this interview for Oxford, or like getting these candidates ready to get her like prepared to go to Oxford or something like that. So we have these two people, and all of a sudden we start to have Abby like secrete this yellow dust, as if she's poison ivy of some sort. And all of a sudden we now have these people that are just like fighting over Abby. They're like, I want to be her person that takes her on to Oxford. No, I do, so on and so forth. And all of a sudden we have Abby that is to realize that these people are grabbing on her and like making her uncomfortable. So Abby goes on and smacks into this janitor, and all of a sudden this janitor gets a whiff of what Abby's putting down, and come to find out this janitor is Doug, the guy who we find out will have powers also. And Doug is talking to Abby, and he's like, oh, I love you, yeah. And Abby, coming to find out, is to grab this aerosol and sprayed around, and that somehow nullifies her power. So Abby's trying to figure this out and trying to control it. So we even have at one point where Abby is to go into her science lab and try to close this door, and all of a sudden we find out like all of her friends, like Jules and Paul, like they are all uncontrollably just wanting Abby. Just I just want me some of that. And so Abby is to go on, and like a fear of her friends, Abby goes on into this shower and she just sprays herself down consistently with this water, hoping that this will nullify her pheromone ability. So, as well as like the aerosol that she keeps spraying throughout this entire show for a number of episodes so far. So, we then have these three characters that are like, hey, like, we got to go on back to this clinic because something is going horribly awry. So we go on, and so each one of them had gone to showcase what all their powers were, and to say that they have super hearing, or to say they have blackouts, or to say that they had this pheromone secretion. And so we of course had a point where Dr. Sarkov was mentioned, like especially to Juan. It's like, man, I wish like just one of the side effects would just be that you would have blackouts. Like, man, like because people would have much worse. And Juan is like, yeah, they probably would have much worse. Like, because Juan ends up also looking at this video of like attacks in town, and come to find out there's some video of Juan going and grabbing a rabbit at night, and like they didn't get to exactly see what this was. So it's just like, okay, like that's the horrific extent of like this guy is grabbing bunnies, okay, whatever. But then I ended up seeing what it actually was, and I was like, oh, okay, like they didn't want to spend a CGI budget on what this thing was. Plus, with this video like that, they want to kind of cheapen the experience. Anyways, so we have all three of these characters who make it back to Dr. Sarkov's clinic after, of course, they find out that Dr. Sarkov is no longer working at this clinic, and he hasn't worked in there for years. And so, like, what? So, we find this out from a Dr. Burke, and so all of a sudden, we now have Dr. Burke who's like, hey, let's go in here, and let's get all these like certain kind of samples, and I'm going to take like you guys all on as my patients to try to help you and figure you out, and figure out how to cure you guys. And so all of a sudden Doug comes in, and Doug is just like, hey, give me those samples, give me those things that Abby has on her. And we also had Dr. Burke, who was to explain to the three of these characters that they had damaged cells, and Dr. Sarkov was to hopefully figure out how he could make all of these characters by putting stem cells in them, how to progress this ability instead of doing the opposite. And so it seems that Burke is to try to correct that whole thing, but she ends up saying some technical jargon, and like, I'm like, whatever you just gotta say here to explain to all these characters. Like, there's so much dialogue here that is done so quickly, and just so like a lot of this dialogue in this show already feels like a lot of it is just being thrown away. And or it just feels like nonsense at some point. And I'm just like, ugh, like this dialogue is so rough. So, and I'm not a dialogue person anyways, as anybody is to know throughout the time of which that we've gone on to see any video that I've talked about here. So, queuing up what I just said 5 seconds ago. So, or whatever dialogue I just spew out a number of seconds ago anyways. So, so we have Doug, who appears, and he's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go on, and I want what you guys have. And so all of a sudden, we try to have Doug be the bad guy here, and then all of a sudden we have Juan, and we have Doug go into this separate room and start fighting one another. And I'm just like, okay, so we finally see that Juan is a chupacabra werewolf that I guess can change during the day or during the night or whatever. He can change whenever. So, chupacabra is to show itself as both Tilda and both Abby are going into the room. It's like, okay, like, should we go in there? Should we see what happened? And then all of a sudden they look at the chupacabra or the werewolf, and he turns to them and he's like, argh! And all of a sudden the werewolf starts walking closer and closer to Abby, grabs the door, and he's coming in to attack Tilda and Abby. And then all of a sudden Dr. Burke ends up hitting him with this needle, and then he goes down. And then we have Juan waking up, and he's like, okay, what did I do? Because obviously he ate somebody. And so we, of course, have to go on and explain that the three of these characters are not exactly human. Then it's like, well, what are we then? And then cue the imperfect title screen in the very beginning of this episode that I'm now covering here. In the very first beginning of this, because we have characters that are looking on as a man is getting dissected, and I was like, okay, why show this? This seems like an unusual scene to start with a show. But it was also kind of funny because Tilda turns and calls Juan Scooby-Doo, and to tell us that he's going to at some point be a werewolf. And oh, this might also feel like New Mutants to a lot of people also, whoever saw New Mutants, because they have a Scooby-Doo kind of thing in that show also. And it has some kind of supernatural kind of flavor to it. You know. Anyways, moving on. So we have them all looking on at Doug's body, and so they're all kind of thinking, it's like, well, do you think this guy has a special ability too? Kind of curious what it is. And so all of a sudden, while these guys are slicing and dicing and chopping up this guy, all of a sudden we hear this boop. What was that? What was that thumping? All of a sudden, we find out that Doug's power is that he's Resurrection Man, that he has the ability to heal up, and we have a point where the characters are realizing, oh my god, this guy's coming back to life? Like, we don't want him to attack us again. What should we do? So they decide to just go on and take this buzzsaw-like thing and just chop the guy's head off. And then it's like, okay, well, that seems to, like, take care of this guy. So in the next episode, in the second episode, they go on and they bury this guy. And they're like, okay, I guess that take cares of that. Like, let's just kind of just... let's wipe our hands of our murdering somebody. So we have Juan and we have Abby who's burying this guy, and then they justified it. It's like, well, yeah, it was technically self-defense. Like, he was gonna kill us, so like we just had to go on and eat him and chop off his head as self-defense. Yeah, that sounds about right. So we have at some point where they turn around and they start realizing that the character Doug may go on and have answers that they don't know. So they're like, oh crap, we're gonna have to unbury this guy and resurrect him and then start asking him questions, hoping that he's gonna give us some kind of answers. And so they end up going on and unburying this guy, and they end up putting his head back on the rest of his body. And so it's starting to heal itself. And then they're just like, well, like, what are we going to do? I guess we'll just wait around until, like, he's healed up. They end up they end up handcuffing him to this bed, realizing he's going to come back to life. So they go on and they're starting to look for other patients of Dr. Sarkoff. It's kind of funny. We had Dr. Burke, who is very upset with Dr. Sarkoff, so she ends up calling him Dr. F off, or she ends up, and so like Dr. Sarkoff is just like, well, I've never heard that before. You could have went with suck off. You could have went with that, helping you bizarrely. But anyways, speaking of Dr. Burke, she starts looking into files of other patients, and supposedly, like, Burke doesn't know whether she's awake or asleep consistently, and she keeps having these nightmares. And so Burke, whenever she starts screaming and anybody's just like, hey, what's wrong? And Burke is just like, oh, it's another nightmare of mine. And that's what she says is her power. That Burke at some point has this horrible nightmare where she was getting beaten with this hammer. And they're like, I'll trade, like, Tilda and Abby are like, hey, I'll trade you powers. If all you have to do is just have a nightmare every single night, like, I think I'll trade with you. I don't think it's that bad of a power. But come to find out, we have Dr. Burke, who doesn't know when she's asleep, when she's awake, because in her dream, she ends up going and getting these files, and then when she wakes, her files are like right there. It's like, oh, did I actually get these files, or was I dreaming about getting these files? I don't know. I wasn't sure. But so, come to find out, Dr. Burke, in her dreams, has this dark half that is to all of a sudden be this kind of faceless kind of entity, but it has this kind of really like jack-o'-lantern like mouth. So it's like a blank slate, but it has this like jack-o'-lantern like mouth. It's really cool. And they showcase this by the end of episode 2, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. This is pretty sweet. I want to see, because like this character, this other side of Dr. Burke is this dark half, is to say that that it's wanting to go on and like destroy all the other characters. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, bring it on. I want to see what this character does to freaking go after some folks. Let's see that. Especially when this is kind of like a Fight Club kind of thing, where or like a Moon Knight kind of situation. Except for on the villain side of things, it's more like Fight Club still, but still. Where like this monster and Burke are one and the same. So yeah, so we have Doug, who finally wakes up, and so Doug ends up telling the group that he will go on and give them answers, but he wants to go on in return, have them kill him, because he is always in pain, and anguish. And so we start to have certain characters that are to kind of be kind of put together, and they have like the same kind of plights where we have Tilda who goes on and starts talking to Doug, and Doug is to mention like, yeah, I ache all the time, and like, was my head chopped off? And Tilda's like, yeah, like we chopped off your head. And so Tilda's to go on and like say her problems, where it's like any like sound like really like irks her, but not only that, um, like she has this like screaming kind of. So Tilda's kind of explaining her problems, and um, so like Tilda is kind of like Daredevil in a way, except for the whole like she can't use a sound to like create like a radar kind of sense of where everything is. Wouldn't that be cool? So we have at some point where Doug is to figure out a way to unchain himself, as we have Doug immediately just figure out a way to grab this gasoline and to grab this road flare, and he ends up putting this road flare into this gasoline container right by this pool, and he immediately ends up blowing himself up, as our four characters are to watch on as the blood is to splat all over them. So they end up going and obtaining every bit of Doug, and they just pour him down into this sink and call it a day. And so they're like, well, I guess we can't get any answers from Doug. So how about we go on instead and just go back to that office that Mr. Sarkoff was in? And they're like, well, we were already in that office. And they're like, well, like, what else better can we do? Because we have to figure out like who these characters or who like his patients were. Because they start trying to figure out this one patient's name, and come to find out this other patient's name was like, they called her Hannah Montana because she was consistently singing this Hannah Montana song consistently. I guess they couldn't afford the copyrights for that song, so they decided, yeah, we're not gonna have her actually sing this song. But so they started to say, it's like, this girl's name is Hannah Montana, right? It's like, yeah, I think it probably is. Sure, maybe she coincidentally has the same name. Wouldn't that be weird? But come to find out, we also had Juan, who is to have a picture of Hannah when he was kind of going through sketches, and he realizes that her name is actually Hannah. And so all of a sudden, we now have Juan's girlfriend that is asking him, like, hey, where have you been for the last 2 days? And Juan ends up explaining, like, well, like, I was to go on and go to this clinic, and it seems that a lot of the people there, like, we all hit it off. Like, we had one that goes and meets up with Tilda, and Tilda is to say that Juan is some stalker or some fan of her band, the Itchy Nips, and that Tilda is to say, it's like, oh yeah, I've signed all kinds of things. I've signed all kinds of body parts, and sometimes I don't even sign it with a pen. Sure you have. So to be funny. So anyways, but yeah, so Juan ends up talking to his girlfriend, and is to try to like get rid of suspicion, to just be like, hey, like I was just going on and hanging out with some friends, like it's not a big deal. And his girlfriend's just like, okay, all right, feels like you're hiding something from me. Feels like you're probably having an affair, because that's what it probably is going to seem for this girl that Juan is going to have an affair, and then somehow it's going to have to be revealed to her. It's like, oh no, I'm just a werewolf murdering people. Hopefully you're okay with that. And we also had Tilda that was talking to Juan, and is to like tell Juan, it's like, well, what are you gonna do when you try to go back to your girlfriend? How is she gonna accept you? Like, you're gonna have to just chain yourself to your house every night. Do you think she'll be okay with that? Juan's like, I don't know, like I haven't figured it out yet. So, anyways, they start to more and more start to figure out that this girl is to be named Hannah, and so they finally figured out that this girl's name is Hannah Moore, and so Abby ends up going to the place where Hannah works, and they try to talk to her to hope that she can give Hannah can give them answers. And it seems at some point that Hannah was to get a call from Dr. Sarkoff, but the number was blocked. And so Hannah was to say that at some point Sarkoff wanted to talk to Hannah to get her in this program, because it seems that every time she tried to use the stem cells, like somehow her body rejected them, and she had tried like 20 some odd times to try to get this procedure to work, and it didn't take. And so Dr. Sarkoff was trying to get a hold of Hannah to see if maybe there was something that he can continue to try to then break through and finally get her to have things working out for her, because Hannah, of course, is supposedly dying. That's her thing. I guess. Like, she doesn't say she has a power, she just says that she's dying. So later on we find out that a character named Isabel is to meet up with Hannah, and she is to pitch to Hannah, well, I don't know what all these other people have kind of told you already, but like, I'm going to go on and tell you that like that Dr. Sarkoff is to figure out a way to get the stem cells to be able to work for you, and like, are you interested? And Hannah's like, yeah, I'm definitely interested. And so that's when we get Isabel, who goes on and is to figure out a way to manipulate Hannah to work with her. So, because Isabel has her own agenda. So, we have Tilda, who at some point is to figure out, well, hey guys, like, how about we just go back to Sarkoff's office? And so they go into that office to find out that there is some secret door that they didn't notice before. So they all of a sudden pull this cabinet, they open this door, and they realize that there is this whole other lab that they weren't aware of. And they're like, oh, all right. Like, so come to find out, there is this whole video about Dr. Sarkoff, who is experimenting on this other powered individual, who is to be chained into this cage, and Sarkoff ends up shooting this this powered being in the head, and they're like, oh my god, like, maybe we don't want to go on and meet Dr. Sarkoff, because who knows what, like, who he is now. Who knows what he's been up to, and so on and so forth. So that again just kind of leads them nowhere to where they're still searching for this guy. They're still looking for him. But they end up figuring out a way to break into this guy's files so they can try and find a number of other patients. And because Abby is to figure this out, because she's Genius Wonder Twin, and she of course can figure out the password, and then she goes in there and starts thumbing through some patient lists and so on and so forth. But again, more and more we start to have Burke, who continues to fall asleep, and at some point by the end of this episode, we then have Burke, who is to look in this mirror and to see the whole, like, I will destroy them all, or I will destroy them uh, on this mirror, and that's kind of how like the episode just kind of tapers off. So with that said, man, did I have to explain a bunch of that. Like, not everything was perfectly done. I'll admit that. But this is usually my outro where I go on and just have to amend the fact that, like, yeah, everything wasn't great, but at least I said things. We also had Tilda in these episodes, who was to talk to PJ and was to mention how she was upset with PJ, how he didn't go on and discuss with her like replacing her or anything. It's just like, oh, okay, like she's out and this other girl's in, and Tilda was hurt, but then PJ is just like, well, like, how is it that you knew that we replaced you? And Tilda is to tell PJ, it's like, well, I have super hearing. And PJ's like, no, like, no, like, you can't. And so Tilda's like, let's try me. So we, of course, have PJ that turns around in the room and is to whisper, and Tilda immediately picks it up exactly what he says. And so he's like, lucky guess. And then, like, he just kind of turns around again, and he mentions how his abs are very distracting. And Tilda ends up going on and like, yeah, we get it. Like, your abs are very distracting. And she's like, and he's like, oh my god, like, you can hear. Man. But I'm kind of confused that Doug is only in one episode. You would think, like, a Resurrection Man would be used in more than one episode for this whole entire season. You could get a lot of use out of that character, but I guess, like, they just figured, like, like, we're going to have just a bunch of one-off characters that have all these powers that they're going to get in the mix of this group, just to either tear them apart or just kind of be this character that we're going to waste time on to figure out a way to just kind of kill them off within the episode. So, with that said, I think I'm just going to go on and try to get out of here. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I forgot about within these two episodes. There's a lot to come over. There was a lot to cover. So, let me also know how you felt about the Imperfects. Whether you would go on and give a really good grading of this show and say, like, oh no, I thought that this show was amazing, and so on and so forth, because there's always those kinds of people that are, to whatever my opinion is, they're like, oh, you're being too harsh. It's like, no, I'm just being honest about the show. I don't think I went on and graded these two episodes. I would go on and just say that this show, just the showcasing of characters alone, I would possibly just I would say that these two episodes are okay, but the more and more that I'm going to go into this show, the more I'm going to realize that there was never a story, and then there was never really anything to do in this show, and more than likely, further down the road, you're going to see me probably grade this show a lot worse off, because they don't have much to do in this show. But I guess there's an hour's worth of me talking about it, so good for me, right? Either way, I have an hour's worth of stuff to just talk about for this show. So yeah, it's okay just because, like, they at least gave me something, but it's gonna get worse further on. So that'll be like, I don't know if I really want to continue this show unless, like, it seems that a lot of people are interested. I kind of want a new show. I kind of want something new to do, anyways. Simply because I feel like I'm just kind of treading water right now for a lot of things. So, anyways, we'll see where this all goes. Bye, everybody. far, but I have talked for long enough. Goodbye, Brady.